Welcome into the show. Thanks for tuning in this Tuesday morning, June the 18th. It is 9 a.m. on the East Coast. This is your 6 a.m. West Coast wake-up call and all time zones in between and around the world. Thanks for tuning in. More World Cup action yesterday. France getting a controversial penalty and then a controversial makeup on the first attempt being missed and scoring and winning 1-0 over Nigeria. I thought it was a little soft, to be honest. The penalty resulting in a second yellow and a red card for the Nigerian defender, and they finished the game with 10 on the field for Nigeria. Today at 3 p.m. Eastern, we have two matches, Jamaica and Australia and Italy and Brazil. So we'll see how those matches shape up. Last night, Copa America action, Chile routed Japan 4-0. Today, Peru, Bolivia play, and Venezuela and Brazil play at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Also, some of the Gold Cup action tonight. Panama and Trinidad kick off at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, and at 10 p.m. Eastern, the U.S. hosts Guyana. We'll see, how the U.S. team looks. I mean, it's Guyana. I don't anticipate there being any problems there. So I don't know that we're going to get any answers compared to what we've seen recently from the men's national team, etc. So anyway, we'll see how those things shape up. The Women's World Cup has just been a lot of really good football, but then you're also seeing a little bit of a gap. There's some teams that are still on the rise, still trying to figure out resources on a domestic level that are hindering their ability to grow. But the one thing I will say is the countries that are starting to put money into the game are really paying off, and it's going extremely well for them, and so that's good to see. And we're really I'm really excited about where the women's game is going. It is getting bigger and bigger and more resources, and it should be. It's been a long time overdue, to be honest. So anyway, When we look at all of these matches going on between the Gold Cup, the Copa America, you have the Euros U21 Championship that's playing today as well. Got an England-France matchup there at 3 p.m. Eastern. You're getting a lot of matches going on this summer, at least right now during the month of June, and then we'll get preseason kicking off for most of Europe in July, and then we're back at it again in August. So it's going to be a busy summer. Not quite as slow, I'm sure, as some thought, thinking about, last year being the Men's World Cup, this being the Women's World Cup, what else is going on? But you have Copa America going on. The U21 Euro Championships, you have the Gold Cup going on, which is not near as high of a tournament as Copa America, but I think that's a situation where, and we've seen comments recently from Tata Martino, the head coach of the Mexican national team, talking about how he wished Mexico was playing in Copa America instead of the Gold Cup, and he's right. I mean, the competition's much better there, and they would get a better test, and there would be more meaningful games in the Gold Cup. He's not wrong, and I think the U.S. should embrace that same mentality and same philosophy as well. So, it when we look at the state of American soccer and we look at our national team on the men's side, we should be trying to find ways for them to get challenges as much and as often as we can, and not getting those challenges and playing. No disrespect to Guyana, but the U.S. needs to be trying to challenge themselves regularly so they can see where they are, and so that the coaching staff as well as the players can see if they can adjust, see if they can get better. When you play these matches like Guyana, I mean, it's like the U.S. women's national team playing Thailand in the Women's World Cup. I mean, what did we learn? Well, the U.S. is way, way above the class of Thailand. That's what we learned. Did we learn much about the U.S. women's national team in that match? Not really. The Chilean match, the second match for the U.S. women's national team on Sunday, we learned a lot more. They won 3-0. They were definitely in control of that match. They looked good. Could have been worse for Chile, but they have probably the best goalkeeper in the world at this point, who made some incredible saves. But, that was a much better picture. And I think if you come out of that match as a U.S. women's national team player or coach, staff member, you're going, okay, things are going pretty good. And the real test and the only test of the group, and from a drama perspective, it's unfortunate that it's not happening until the third match of the group. I wish it had been the first match, to be honest. I think that group would have been a lot more entertaining had the USA Sweden match been the first match of the group and not the last game of the group. Basically, the U.S. wins the group now with a draw or a win, and Sweden can win the group with a win. And how much do they go at it? I don't know. But I think that match would have been much more compelling had it been the first match, maybe the second match. Being the last match, they're both already through. We'll see how it plays out. But that's going to be a much tougher test. Sweden has given the U.S. Women's national team issues when they've played in the past. And we'll see if they can continue to do that in this next match. But, testing is what you're looking for when you're running a program. You want to get an accurate measurement of what you're doing, how you're doing it, and what you need to improve on, all of those things. You can't really tell when you're the U.S. women's national team playing Thailand and everything's just going in. You have one of those nights, everything's going in, you're just way above the level of your opponent, etc. It's much easier to evaluate, whether that's a self-evaluation or a coaching evaluation, when you are in a situation where you are, having to look at the the level of an opponent like a Sweden in the case of the U.S. women's national team and themselves. It's a much truer picture of where you're at. How well are you clicking? How well are you playing? If you are the U.S. men's national team, playing those matches leading up to the Gold Cup gave us a better picture of where we are than the Gold Cup. So you want to be playing matches that are giving you evaluations, and then you want to be playing in meaningful competitions that are helping you get better, because ultimately the ultimate prize in all of this is to get to and win the World Cup. As a national team, that is the peak. And if that is the goal for the U.S. men's national team, to win a World Cup, then every 4-year cycle should be about testing, proving yourself, building up towards, playing in competitions that prepare you for the World Cup. And if you're not in that, what are we doing? What are we doing? I mean, we're just wasting time. And so we'll see how things shape up. Time will tell. That's all I know. Time will tell. And we'll see the U.S. national team. I don't think is going to have any issues tonight with Guyana. If they do, that won't be good. So anyway, our sponsor this half hour is Dutt Kick Brand. The website for Dutt Kick Brand is DUTKIGbrand.com. Again, that is DUTKIGbrand.com. You can get your coaching planners, your player planners. There's all kinds of tools and resources that are available. And when you go there, use the promo code DWSHOW to get 10% off your order and support this show at the same time. Again, that is DWSHOW, and you'll get 10% off your order. All at duttkickbrand.com. Check them out. Go there today. Place your order. Get it in time for your upcoming training sessions or your fall season. They're incredible products, and it would be worth your time to check them out. So, again, visit them at duttkickbrand.com. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back into the show. Thanks for tuning in this Tuesday morning, June the 18th. We are pleased to be joined by Ken Benzinger, author of Red Card. Ken, welcome to the show. How are you this morning?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on today.
So, your book details, Red Card details this FIFA scandal that was uncovered and exposed in the last few years and culminated in arrest and in ousters within FIFA, within the game around the world, leaders around the world, etc. Before we get into some of that story, and it's fascinating to me, the work that you covered and the way that you put this together in the book, what drove you to look at this in the first place?
So I was actually, it's a fun story for me to tell. I first got interested in this world, and by way of background, I should say that I'm an investigative reporter with a business background and not necessarily a sports reporter. I'm a sports fan, and I periodically have convinced editors over the years to allow me to do sports reporting here and there, but it's never been my full-time beat. But at my previous job, I used to work Times. I had an editor who was from Trinidad, and this is, gosh, getting back to maybe like 2009, 2010. He used to regale me with stories about this guy from Trinidad called Jack Warner, whom I'd never heard of. I didn't grow up playing the sport, and though I'd become a soccer fan, I didn't really know much about its governance at the time. And he would tell me about Jack Warner and what a scoundrel he was. And I became interested in Jack Warner and would Google around on him. And inevitably, when I started digging into Jack Warner, there'd always be a mention or two of his sort of sidekick, Chuck Blazer. And Chuck Blazer interested me because he was an American, and it seemed astounding to me that someone as important as him could have sort of gone for as many years with so much power and yet have no public profile in the U.S. or almost no public profile. And so I always had it on my list, like I'd like to write a profile of Chuck Blazer and just learn more about him. But it wasn't something that ever came together when I was at the LA Times. And when I went to BuzzFeed, which is where I currently work on the investigations team, I had a story list of stories I'd like to do. And number 2 or 3 in the list was this profile of Chuck Blazer. And the number 1 story in the list fell apart basically because I got scooped by the Wall Street Journal on that topic. And there was something wrong with number 2, or it could wait. And so early in 2014, or sort of around March of 2014, my boss and I agreed that it was time to try to do a Chuck Blazer profile. So I spent several months writing that profile, and it ran right as the 2014 World Cup in Brazil was starting. I think it ran within a day or two of the starting date of the World Cup tournament. And the idea was to run the article and then move on to other topics. And the article did pretty well. It was well received in the soccer football community, and outside of it as well. But after that, I sort of moved on with my life and moved on to topics that had nothing to do with soccer. And it wasn't until a year later, almost exactly a year, like 360 days after I ran the article, is when those famous raids in Zurich happened, where Swiss went into multiple Zurich hotels and arrested all these FIFA officials. And at that point, the world became aware that there was a U.S. investigation of corruption in the sport. It wasn't until then, and a few days later, when it came out that Blazer had been a cooperator in the case, that my article really blew up, went viral, was the most read story on the website, and had sort of a second life, which is pretty unusual for a big 7,000 or 8,000 word feature to do like that. Usually they come out and they pop in the first few days and life goes on. But this story found its renaissance a year after publication. And there was a tremendous amount of interest at that point for me to do more. And in kind of a whirlwind fashion, I went from, gee whiz, it's funny how that year-old story blew up again, to having a book deal and a movie deal, and realizing that I now had to immerse myself in the history and culture of a sport that I was only really dimly aware of, and that's how that adventure began.
So just getting started down this fascinating road, and for those of us who love the sport and follow the sport, live the sport, you have written a really incredible, I mean, it's almost so crazy that the only thing it could be is true, just some of the things that you covered and uncovered in your investigation. And you said towards the beginning of the book, quote, dozens of people from more than 15 different countries would eventually be charged with violating the United States' stiff racketeering, money laundering, fraud, and tax laws, exposed for their part in what prosecutors described as a decades-long, highly orchestrated criminal conspiracy calculated to twist the beloved sport to their selfish designs. Many of those caught up in the investigation would throw themselves at the mercy of the Department of Justice, forfeiting hundreds of millions of dollars and quietly agreeing to cooperate. When you looked into this, did you have any idea when you first wrote this expose on Chuck Blazer that you were going to end up with a story that encapsulated those kinds of facts and issues and that amount of money and people?
I mean, there's no way. When I was investigating Blazer, it was really clear from what was out there already in 2014 that this was not, the clean hands were not his, that it was dirty doings by him, and it looked all filthy. But there was no evidence that I had that he was part of an investigation, if there would be a bigger investigation, or it went much further beyond him. I actually recall calling the FBI and the DOJ in the early months of 2014, asking them if there's anything going on, and they didn't give me a useful answer. They do this thing where they don't deny it, but they don't confirm it. What they say is, we don't discuss ongoing investigations, and we don't deny or confirm the existence of investigation. So there was no evidence that they had anything going on. And I spoke to Blazer on the phone, and he didn't really want to talk. Looking back, of course, the reason he didn't want to talk is because he wasn't allowed to talk. He was a cooperator. But at the time, it struck me as he didn't want to talk because he knew he had dirty hands. And it was impossible for me to imagine at that point, and clearly for even people in the filthiest ranks of the world of FIFA, to imagine that they were all under investigation. The evidence that the prosecutors kept it secret really well is the fact they were able to arrest all these people completely unaware, and then to do it again. So no, I think it was a complete surprise that it could be something this big. And
whenever you look at the sport, and you're maybe you're a mom, you're a dad, you're following your kids, and maybe you turn on the TV and you watch FC Barcelona play Liverpool in a Champions League semifinal, things like that. You're not generally thinking about conspiracy and soccer cartel and fraud and bribery. But when you looked into this and you started kind of going down this kind of rabbit hole or rabbit trail of well, this is connected to this, and then looking into this, well, how did this go to here? And you do such a good job of detailing that in the book. When you were looking into all of that, did you start to get a sense of how those actions by individuals like Chuck Blazer, like Jack Warner, were having an adverse effect on the game itself around the world?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was part of the I think the learning experience for me in reporting this out was as I learned the history of the sport, and also the history of the organization of FIFA and the confederations and the national associations, and the history of corruption investigations and all this. Also, the understanding of what the impact of all this had on the different levels of the sport. And because of the sort of rigid hierarchical structure of FIFA that radiates down all the way down to national associations and down to youth organizations, it becomes really clear the impact of corruption on that. You can really see it. And when you travel, as I did for the story, and you visit countries in South America and elsewhere, you see how undernourished the sport is at many levels, and how unfair many aspects of the sport are. It becomes really crystal clear how money that should have been directed and resources that should have been directed to people who need it were instead taken by these people who are corrupt. It's a good one to see where the crimes are far from victimless, right? You can see how people are hurt, and I think we still see it today. I think there's some real great iniquities in the sport that are the product of a culture where greed and self-interest dominate.
In terms of the U.S.'s role, just for the audience sake, why was it the U.S. government and the FBI and the DOJ that got involved? Why wasn't it England? Why wasn't it France? Why wasn't it another country? Why was it the U.S. taking such an active role?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think the simple answer is that no one else would do it. The English and the French and the Italians and had never so much as even tried to go after corruption in the sport. The Swiss and the Brazilians had taken a few half-hearted swings at it, but they never got anywhere. The Swiss opened a big investigation following the collapse and bankruptcy of a organization called International Sports and Leisure, ISL, which was which basically controlled all rights for FIFA for many, many years and was profoundly corrupt. The Swiss had all they needed to really do a massive criminal investigation of that, and in the end, let everyone off, let them all off. Didn't have the guts to make it a criminal thing. They let two of the most corrupt people in the sport's history pay what amounted to fines that were a fraction of all the money they profited off the sport, and let them walk away with not even a slap on the wrist. The Brazilians were constantly opening investigations into corruption, and then for political reasons, within their political structure down there, within their Congress, would never go any further. They would never go beyond a prosecutor's recommendation that there be an investigation, or prosecutors would never take the case. And so there's all these institutions that were aware of serious problems in sport, but none of them ever took a swing at it. And I think the reason for that is because in so many countries, soccer's role is so deeply intertwined in the power structure at the highest levels of government that it's politically almost impossible to go after it. The damage for any politician or any public figure is just too great. It's kind of hard to really appreciate that as an American soccer fan or someone who loves the sport here, the role it has in other countries, unless one has spent considerable time in those places. It's if you go to a country like Brazil, or you go to a country like Italy or Argentina, soccer isn't just a really popular pastime. It's also a political pastime and an economic influencer in the whole country. And the closest I can think of is if you imagine that the NBA, NFL, and Major League Baseball were all rolled into one thing, and you can imagine not just the popularity, but also the political muscle that would have, and the influence it would have on political activities and economic activities and social activities and cultural identity, that's like in those countries. And I think it just too hot to touch. When people would try to touch it, they would get burned. But the fact that the U.S. is still has soccer as the fourth or fifth most popular sport, in a funny way, helped make that investigation possible, because it provided the kind of cover that investigators needed to run it in secret. One of the things I discovered while reporting out Red Card was how the investigators in the U.S. quickly learned not to rely on investigators from other countries, which is often what you do when you're an American prosecutor and you're doing an international case. You're going to be on the phone with or traveling to visit and prosecutors from other countries because you want their help. You want to get documents people, so you need their help to do it, because you can't. An FBI agent can't just fly to Germany or something and interview people. They need to do it with German law enforcement. Well, in this case, they learned early on to keep those people out of the loop completely, because they couldn't trust them, because soccer was special. And if you told a German or a British law enforcement agent that you were investigating corruption in sport, it was going to end up in the newspapers within a couple of days. And so that was a challenge, and was the way the rest of the country just wouldn't do it. And to prevent undermining it, they kept it secret. And, from a legal standpoint, the way they were able to do this case is because the dollar is the denomination of currency that's used in that throughout the whole world, and has been the currency used to pay bribes and to commit corrupt acts in soccer since time immemorial, or at least since the 1970s. So all these transactions tended to be denominated in dollars, and they also tended to flow through American banks at some point. A funny quirk of the world banking system is that even if you're an Uruguayan and you want to bribe a Brazilian, and you want to wire $1 million to him, you send that wire, even though it's going from an Uruguayan bank to a Brazilian bank, it's most likely going to flow through a bank in New York, D.C., or Miami on its way to from Brazil or Uruguay to Brazil. And because it goes through these American intermediary banks, you've now created jurisdiction in the U.S., and that's the jurisdictional hook the prosecutors use primarily to make the case.
So one of the things that you said was that America's case against soccer corruption did not start at the top, but it was a product of careful, patient police work by dedicated investigators. And then you went on to say, and it is still very much ongoing. Is this something that they're still keeping an eye on, still investigating, still looking into?
They are, and I have to say, as a reporter, it's at times frustrating because I don't know where it's going. There was some hints. The timeline is that the investigation. I figured this out, and I was the first to report it. Was really began in mid 2010, but it didn't become public until those arrests I mentioned earlier in May 2015. There was an indictment then. There was a second indictment in late 2015, in December 2015. And then there have been several other individuals who were charged with crimes since then. But the most recent people charged with crimes were dating back to 2017, maybe early 2018. Essentially, though, we haven't seen significant public advances in the case since the second half of 2017. And despite that, the prosecutors seem to be resisting sewing up the case. All these people who have been charged with a crime and have pleaded guilty and are cooperating with the case and are awaiting their criminal sentencing continue to get their sentences pushed forward at the urging of the prosecution. They're kicking the can further and further down the road. You can't wrap up a case until you sentence all the guilty parties, and for some reason that's not happening. And typically, prosecutors want to push off sentencing of cooperators because they still need their cooperation. If you think about cooperation as a kind of an arrangement between prosecutors and someone who is cooperating with them, the deal is the cooperator is looking for their mercy. So he or she is willing to do anything the prosecutors tell them to do in hopes that when it comes time for their criminal sentencing, the prosecutors will say nice things to the judge about them, and recommend a smaller sentence. And there's really no limit to the amount of goodwill you can build up as a cooperator with the prosecutors in your attempt to stay out of jail or to stay in jail for as short time as possible. And prosecutors know that. They also know that once they sentence you, once the judge sentences you, and you get your prison time, there's nothing more the prosecutor's going to offer you. There's no more carrot they can dangle over your head, and therefore your incentive to be a good cooperator or a good witness is down to basically zero. So typically, when a sentence is delayed, it's because something's still brewing. They still want some information from that cooperator. They still want their testimony at trial, if there is a trial, this kind of stuff. And so we're seeing sentence after sentence after sentence delayed, which is a continual tip that there's something else coming, but we don't know what. And it's been that way for 18 months or more. Just today, I was tweeting that a Honduran who had been president of the country of Honduras, as well as president of their soccer federation, who pleaded guilty to 2 or 3 counts of the case, he was set to be sentenced tomorrow, and it's now just been delayed till October. And that's just every couple of weeks someone else gets their sentence delayed. It all suggests some other shoe's going to fall, but when, I really don't know.
In your investigation and looking at this corruption that is, was across the globe, it was not just one person. I mean, this was a massive network of money changing hands, bribes, etc. In looking at that, what did you learn about the structure, the governance aspect of FIFA?
What I learned?
Yeah,
what do you mean?
In terms of how they make decisions, how decisions are then executed, how do they open themselves up, for example, to corruption and bribery, etc.
Yeah, I understand. I'm sorry. So, FIFA is organized as a democracy. And as I dug around and read a lot of stuff and looked at the history of it, it was pretty clear that it was sort of an example of where democracy can go wrong. The way it's organized, it's changed a little bit, but the way it was organized at the time the corruption was sort of at its apparent peak was there's every member of FIFA, meaning every nation that's a FIFA member, has one representative seat in the FIFA Congress. There's currently about 211 members last time I checked. So there's 211 voting member countries in FIFA. They traditionally voted for the president and a few other things, but that was the limit to what they voted on. Meanwhile, there was an executive committee, an executive council now it's called, that was composed of, at the time, of 24 members, including the president of FIFA, who was, as we said, elected by the Congress, and then typically presidents of the six confederations and an assortment of other people who were brought into the committee. And they run the day-to-day operations of FIFA via vote. So they would determine all kinds of things, but most critically, where the World Cups were held, where the U20 World Cups, the Women's World Cups, who had the marketing contracts, who had the hospitality contracts, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing is that FIFA is structured as a nonprofit, and so that FIFA doesn't pay money to its officers other than a flat executive committee members get a flat kind of an annual salary for that position. But there's no bonuses, there's no profit sharing. The money is supposed to belong to the Congress and to each country, and so it's supposed to be distributed to them. And what happens is you develop a system where patronage and power hoarding become central. The people who become president want to keep that job because it's an enormously powerful job, and also one that's it's a very great lifestyle and has lots of influence and a high reputation, that sort of thing, or a big reputation anyway. And so to ensure you continue in that position, you have the purse strings, you dole out money to people and make them thankful and grateful. Instead of doling out money and ensuring that it's properly distributed to everyone who loves the sport, you wink and a nod, and the understanding that the president of the Ivory Coast Federation or the Sri Lanka Federation might not necessarily spend all that money in the places he or she should. So that's, I think, one of the principal forms of corruption is the way the money, the many, many millions and billions of dollars that come into FIFA is distributed to the federations without proper oversight. And then at the executive committee level, since you have a group of people meeting in a room in secret with no outside accountability, you have this problem of people having incentive to sell their vote or to take bribes for different kinds of activities. So the selling the vote would be most famously was the World Cup in South Africa, the World Cup in Qatar, even arguably the World Cup in Russia, was money changing hands or other kinds of favor changing hands to sway the votes of executive committee members. And also, as we learned in the case of this criminal, in the course of this criminal case, was money changing hands for people with such power to award TV and sponsorship rights contracts to bidders. And at least according to testimony in the case, yes, there were people paying bribes for TV rights to executive committee members.
When we look at the global governing body, FIFA, and you've done a great job kind of for the audience explaining FIFA, how they're constructed, how they govern, how they make decisions, how they could be open to bribes, etc. The United States Soccer Federation, which is the body under FIFA and its regional governing body, CONCACAF, that governs the sport of soccer, football here in the United States, has its own structure and system in terms of governance and voting, etc. When you look at the United States Soccer Federation, have you seen any similarities in the way that certain things are decided or governed in the way that you looked at FIFA in terms of opening themselves up to either conflicts of interest or having for example in the situation of Sunil Gulati, who was president of U.S. Soccer through 2018, for example, being on the payroll of Robert Kraft, the owner of the New England Revolution in Major League Soccer and the New England Patriots.
Yeah. So the U.S. Soccer Federation, as you said, is underneath CONCACAF, and CONCACAF is under FIFA. The president of CONCACAF is on the FIFA Executive Committee, now Council. Chuck Blazer, who had been the General Secretary of CONCACAF, was up there too, representing U.S. interests. And Sunil Gulati, who until February of 2018, if I have the dates right, was also president of was president of the U.S. Soccer Federation at the same time, was on the executive council of FIFA. It's all part of that hierarchy. And within it, you have, it sort of mirrors it. Like each is like, it's like a fractal. Each piece mirrors the same pattern as above it. So within CONCACAF, you have a structure that kind of mirrors the FIFA relationship with the confederations. Within the U.S. Soccer Federation, you have a structure that kind of mirrors what's above it too. So within U.S. Soccer Federation, you have different committees. You have a executive committee. You have membership that answers to it. It's a nonprofit, the same way that FIFA is kind of a nonprofit. And the big, U.S. Soccer Federation has certain ways of generating money, and probably the most important of all is the rights to commercial and television rights to the national team, the men's team and the women's team. Probably unique or close to unique among international or national associations. The U.S. has a structure where the women's rights may be worth as much or more than the men's rights, or at least close to it. I don't know. I haven't seen the numbers, but that's certainly one of the arguments put out there. But in any case, those packages of rights have become much more valuable over the years, and U.S. Soccer generates a big chunk of its revenue from that. And one of the big contentions out there is whether the way that that's handled is handled with clean hands, and whether the people who decide where to allocate those rights are doing it in the best interest of the sport as opposed to the interest of other people. So Sunil Gulati, as you mentioned, not only was he president of the U.S. Soccer Federation and a member of the FIFA Council, but he also was a former vice president I'm sorry, I'm not sure what his title was, but he was a high up position, maybe vice president of Soccer United Marketing and MLS, where he was heavily involved for many years. And then he was an employee of the New England Revolution of Robert Kraft. And as I understand it, by his own admission, he was, for at least 6 years while he was president of the U.S. Soccer Federation, also a paid employee of Robert Kraft. And the issue there is that since Robert Kraft is the owner-operator of the New England Revolution, he's a stakeholder in MLS and Soccer United Marketing, its marketing arm, and he personally stands to profit from the sale of the marketing rights to U.S. Soccer Federation properties. And like any commercial transaction, if you are on the buying side, if you're buying the rights to resell them, you want to buy low and sell high. The lower the price they can get for those rights, that is Soccer United Marketing, then the bigger their profit is when it turns around time to sell advertising against it and everything else. And so the contention would be that Sunil Gulati's interest is at a conflict. He should be trying to get the most, as president of U.S. Soccer Federation, he should be trying to get the most money possible for those rights. But as an employee of MLS, he's got a financial interest in getting the lowest price possible for those rights for the MLS. Don Garber, who of course is CEO of MLS, also for many years has held a board seat on the U.S. Soccer Federation and has the same or even worse conflict in his position. And so the question was always whether the fact that Soccer United Marketing was awarded over and over again the rights to U.S. soccer properties, was that proper? Was that done with the proper arm's length manner? And was the price that U.S. Soccer Federation was getting for those rights the true market price, or was it basically an inside deal? And a lot of people have a lot of feelings about that. There is ongoing litigation about it. And a lot of people feel that, in fact, U.S. Soccer Federation, it's an inside con job, basically, in that U.S. Soccer Federation is selling itself out cheap so that the MLS owners can make more money.
So before we go, I want to ask you if you could be made the head of soccer around the world. So let's make you the king of FIFA for a day, and you could unilaterally make any decision that would affect governance, knowing what you know, the corruption that you've uncovered, the things that you have researched and continue to research within U.S. soccer, within CONCACAF, within FIFA itself. What would you do with your one day in charge?
Oh, that's easy. I'd make everyone buy my book in paperback and read it. It's a joke.
Great answer. Great answer.
Yeah, thank you. No, I mean, this is a shameless plug, but I think that I've heard from creators around the world, people who run premiership teams. I've heard from people high up within governance at UEFA, CONMEBOL for sure, people who have read the book and thought that it was for them understanding the inherent governance problems the sport has. So I am shamelessly plugging it, but I do think that what I tried to do was to provide a book that was both to read because it was a story and a narrative, and it's a true crime story, and people get arrested and handcuffed and all that kind of stuff. But also really explains how this all works. And there's a really fun book called How Soccer Explains the World, but that's a bunch of stories about things that happen in the sport. It's not really an explainer, and I really wanted to do a book that explained how this works. So when you read it, you can step away and feel like you have at least a soccer 101 knowledge of the sport. And the book, which just came out in paperback last week, I think Red Card does a pretty good job of doing that. But once everyone's read that, what I would do in my one day, I think, was try to figure out some way to find out who a watchdog would be. I would try to subvert FIFA and all the confederations and all the national associations to some kind of third-party neutral arbiter who has regulatory power over it and can make sure that the books are clean. There's just no one to do that. I mean, the only watchdog this sport has ever really had is the U.S. Department of Justice, and we can't really count on that as a long-term solution. I don't think the Department of Justice wants to do that. I don't think it feels comfortable in the long term doing that. Maybe in the short term, but I think long term, those prosecutors want to move on eventually too. And it's just not it's not the way these things should run. But since it's an international organization based in Switzerland and has a very negative attitude towards national regulators getting involved, it's avoided that, and I think it's to its detriment. I think having to answer to having outside stakeholders or independent voices that can say this is not okay and you have to stop is really important. You can't rely on the auditing firms like KPMG and BBO and PricewaterhouseCoopers to do it, because we've seen it time and time again in many things, not just sports, where if you're a corrupt organization, you don't like the numbers that Pricewaterhouse is giving you, you just fire them and hire KPMG, and that's rampant in soccer. It's just really clear that what it needs is some outside party to keep it in line.
I completely agree. I think that one of the things when we look at governance, whether it's a local sports organization or it's a global organization like FIFA, it's always important to put the right systems and structures in place so that you don't put yourself in a position where you get into conflicts of interest, and it can be a pain at times, but you protect yourself and you protect those involved. And ultimately, you're protecting the sport you're trying to govern, and I think that's a smart way to go about it. I want to ask you, what was the most surprising thing that you discovered in your research for Red Card?
The most surprising thing. I mean, I was very interested in seeing how the case unfolded, and I think one of the most surprising things I found is that how so much of this wasn't preconceived by the prosecutors. They didn't know what road they were going down to. I mean, I was green coming into this, but in 2010, 11, when these guys were digging in, they knew way less than I did. I mean, they really came in green, and it really surprised me how they got to a big heart of the corruption of the sport just organically and on their own, and how an investigation that actually began as a look at Russia morphed into something that was in a totally different direction. And that was fascinating to me. As I reported it, I discovered it really had begun as a tip from the UK about possible Russian corruption with the World Cup bid for 2018. And it took sort of a dramatic left turn towards North and South America. And it was just fascinating to see how that came together. And also sort of it's a big what if, because if a few things didn't work out the way they wanted, it never would have happened. If Chuck Blazer hadn't been a tax cheat on top of being a crook, they never would have got him, and I don't think the case ever would have gone anywhere. If Chuck Blazer had just paid taxes, even if he had cheated on his taxes, I think he would have got away with it, and we never would have seen this case go anywhere. And it would have been like a lot of Justice Department cases, which is they open it up well-intentioned, they can't get anything, and they close it down quietly. And that was very surprising to me. I mean, There's also a few missteps in the case where there were sort of things that got away that shouldn't have got away. There's several key figures in the case that got away. I think one who should have been brought to justice is Ricardo Teixeira, who is a Brazilian whose father-in-law for many years was João Havelange, who was president of FIFA for, 24 years or something. Two incredibly corrupt figures. Havelange died too early to get him, but Teixeira was living in Miami, and they could have got him, and they could have got him, and they didn't. And by the time they wanted to get him, it was too late. He was back in Brazil, and Brazil doesn't extradite its citizens. So I was interested in the missteps. I was interested in the missed opportunities. More than anything, I was interested in the way that but for a few little things here and there, it never would have happened.
Well, it's a fascinating story and a fascinating ride going through the book Red Card. I highly recommend to everyone watching, listening, if you have not taken the time to get Ken's book Red Card, do it today. It is now out on paperback. You can get it on your Kindle devices as well if you prefer the digital reading experience. But it is worth your read to see this fascinating tale that affected the game of soccer all over the world and is still being felt. The ramifications of this is still being felt today. And we look forward to following that story, but also your work as well. And who knows, maybe you'll have Yellow Card coming out at some point, cautionary tales of U.S. soccer at some point that we can find, and we'd love to have you back on to chat on that one as well in the future.
It'll be my pleasure. I mean, Yellow Card. We'll have to work on the title. I feel like you can't. Once you go to Red Card, you can't really go to. You can't sort of downgrade a Yellow Card. We'll have to find something stronger.
I know. That was on the fly, but it was the best I could come up with in the moment.
No, I like what you're thinking. We just got to. We can do better. You and I will have to chat off about what the title of that book would be. I certainly there's people on the internet who like to call it like Cabal, or something along those lines. That's where the hearts of American soccer fans are. So. It's a work in progress. We'll figure it out.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Ken, for coming on the show. We really do appreciate you spending some time with us. And again, everyone, go get that book, Red Card. It is worth the read. Thanks, Ken, for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, and have a good one.
Thank you. That was Ken Benzinger, the author of Red Card. Fascinating look into the corruption in the sport of soccer all over the world. And it is worth your time and worth your read. Speaking of being worth your time and your read, if you have not learned about Charity Water, you should go to charitywater.org. They are the sponsor of this half hour, and they provide clean drinking water to people all over the world. You can learn more about Charity Water again at charitywater.org. We'll be right back after this.
No one, no man, no woman, no child should ever have to drink green water with bugs, with algae, with disease in it. Bad water and a lack of toilets kills more people than all the wars in the world. We know how to bring clean drinking water right now to every single person on earth. And when you can bring water into communities, it truly transforms them. It changes everything. Or you could know that you'd made a difference. You could know that you had truly impacted the life of a family, of a community, of a region. There was either clean water or there wasn't. We believe in a world where every single person has clean and safe water to drink, and we will continue fighting until that happens.
Welcome back into the show. Thanks for tuning in this Tuesday morning, June the 18th. I could have gone for 10 hours with Ken on all of this stuff, this corruption stuff. And speaking of, further investigations, today, Michel Platini, the former president of UEFA and head of European football, has been arrested over the decision to award the 2022 World Cup to Qatar. The former France international captain was detained by French police on Tuesday morning in Nanterre, a western suburb of Paris, as part of the investigation into corruption surrounding how the 2022 World Cup hosting rights were awarded. Investigators leading the fight against corruption within football have arrested him on suspicion of corruption as part of the case looking into how Qatar won the right to host the next World Cup. The investigations continue. It seems like red card part 2 may be on the horizon for Ken. And as I was joking with him at the end of our interview, maybe a yellow card or something better in terms of a title can come as a sequel and continue to follow what's going on, as well as Soccer United marketing in U.S. soccer and Major League Soccer, and there is very much a similarity in the way that FIFA has been governed and operated and in U.S. soccer. Although the mechanics of both organizations are not identical, there is a very similar spirit in the way that both have been run, and power, control, money have been at the heart of it, and the game is not been the most important priority for the federation. It has been the wishes and the desires of a few over the many. And, when you come to understand that part and you come to understand that point about U.S. soccer, it gives you a perspective of, what you should be looking at, what you should be looking into, and having, not wearing the rose-colored glasses. It's real easy to mistake this, love for your country and your national teams and wanting to see them be successful, wanting our youth national teams. Look, those athletes, those players that are on the field, that are playing and wearing the national team crest, that is not what we're talking about. That is not who we are talking about. What we're talking about are those at the very top of the federation who are responsible for leading this federation and providing the vision and direction and decision-making and where the money goes with the federation. And it is clear to see with the current television contract between U.S. Soccer and Major League Soccer, it is clear to see how there's been favoritism shown time and time again to Major League Soccer. We have pulled money out of the federation to prop up Major League Soccer, to give them arbitrary value that they weren't getting on their own. And for all of the MLS sycophants out there who think that we had to do this, we have to do this to support. No, we don't. We don't have to provide guaranteed outcomes. What we need is equal opportunity, not equal outcomes. We don't need to provide anyone with anything except for an opportunity. That way, when we create the right environment, the environments that we see around, the structure and systems we see around the world, when we have a FIFA compliant system in terms of play and governance in regards to club opportunity, meaning you can go as high and as big as you want if you're a good organization and you invest the kind of resources you want to invest in your own club. If you do those kind of things and you build your club as big as you can go, then that's equal opportunity. That's not a guaranteed equal outcome. But if we have, people like Rocco Camiso who come in and say, look, I'm going to put in $100 million into the New York Cosmos, and we're going to build this thing up over the course of the next 10 years to be the best club in America, he should have that ability to do that and not have to go through the hoops and the cabal and the soccer cartel set up between the U.S. Soccer Federation and Major League Soccer. They are in bed together, and they are keeping out everyone else. And the only way to the top right now is through them, is paying them off and getting them to accept you into their club, period. And that's not how it should work. And, I hope that as we continue to look into the future of how we can get better as a country, we look right there at Soccer United Marketing, Major League Soccer, and the U.S. Soccer Federation, and recognize that the athlete council that is responsible in theory for representing our athletes is not doing its job and putting itself in cahoots with Don Garber and the professional council has meant that a lot of things, including honoring our armed forces within the Federation, have been subverted due to those two councils. At the last AGM, the Athlete Council and the Professional Council voted together to block the armed forces and their involvement with their soccer programming that is already a part of the Federation from having a voice on the board. It's ridiculous. And when we see that kind of corruption and those kinds of I'll do you a favor, you do me a favor, eventually that needs to be exposed, and it needs to be rooted out of our federation. We should have an open, democratic system, and it should be based around our clubs. They are the vehicle. They are the vessel for everything that we do in this country. And without clubs being that primary piece of developing coaches, developing players, etc., and then those collections of clubs coming together to have a voice, if their voices are silenced so that Major League Soccer can have a bigger voice, that is ridiculous. And those are the things that need to change going forward. And the time is now. The time is now. We need to make these changes. And we'll see where the Platini investigation goes. Does it stick? Was it just questioning? Was it truly an arrest? A little bit of conflicting reports on it. We'll see. The bottom line is this investigation isn't over, as Ken Benzinger pointed out in his book Red Card, and here we are on the same day that I asked that question, and we have another arrest, and we'll see where it goes. Again, I hope Ken and others continue to do that great work and research and finding what they can about Soccer United Marketing, Major League Soccer, and the U.S. Soccer Federation, because there are a lot of people in this country. You don't realize where the pain is coming from, where the angst is coming from, where the frustration is coming from. But I'm telling you, it stems from the source is from this relationship between U.S. Soccer, Major League Soccer. It affects everything, including your 5 or 6 year old playing in rec soccer. I promise you. And over the next weeks, hopefully we can show you how that connects together, because it is felt everywhere in this country. So thanks for tuning in again. We really do appreciate it. You can watch always live at 9 a.m. weekdays Eastern Standard Time on danielworkman.com. We'll see everyone again tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in.